Awesome. Okay, so today is November 23rd, 2024. My name is Sarah Holger, and I am here with, what's your name?
My name is Andrea Finke Oevering.
And we are here at the Fillmore County History Center in Fountain, Minnesota. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the missioners of the Cherry Grove area and their kind of involvement possibly with the Underground Railroad. So I'm going to start with some questions, and then we can kind of go off wherever that takes us. But we'll start with you. So Andrea, is that how you say it? Andrea? Mm-hmm. When and where were you born?
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1978. My father was going to college at River Falls, Wisconsin at the time.
And did you grow up in the cities then? Or?
No. By 1980, we lived in Lewiston in Winona County.
Okay. Okay, so then it hops right into the other stuff. Well, actually, how did you get interested in genealogy? That's always interesting.
I have parents who adore history and grandparents who adore history, and I truly believe if you believe in genetic imprinting of experiences, I believe that to be true, and I believe that it's a genetic trait that gets passed down.
Sure. Well, and plus you said a lot of people, was it your grandma that was the kind of historian for the area?
Absolutely.
So people were like sending her stuff as people passed away. So you kind of grew up around that.
Absolutely.
So you can appreciate history. Okay, so we're talking about the missioners. So can you tell me more about, is it John Michener? Who's the first one that comes here? A little bit more about him. Like, where did he come from? When did he come here? That kind of stuff.
John Michener came to Fillmore County in the early spring of 1857. He was raised a Quaker in Mount Pleasant, Ohio, and spent his early adulthood in Indiana. He was in Indiana by, I believe, like 1927. Well, it's in here. So he was born in 1819. John Longstreth Michener was the son of John and Martha Longstreth Michener. Michener is an old Quaker name that will bring you back to William Penn's Pennsylvania in 1686.
Okay.
Longstreth is also an old Pennsylvania Quaker surname. So, by 1815, the Longstreth Michener line of my direct ancestors were living in Short Creek, Jefferson County, Ohio. The oral history or the written history of John Longstreth Michener's daughter, Rachel Soule of Fillmore County, says they moved to Minnesota for better health, I believe, if I remember that correctly. And they had children born already and they were not original homesteaders of the property in Fillmore County. They found land and purchased it, and it already had a log cabin on it with a clearing. And that land is northeast of Etna, Fillmore County, and this would be south and west of Forestville, which we know is a early community in territorial era Minnesota.
So then how are you related to John Michener, Longstreth?
John Longstreth Michener and Martha Blackledge, who he married, who is also an old Quaker Pennsylvania name. They had a son named Charles Raymond Michener, who had a daughter named Mabel Michener, and she married a German immigrant's son named Emil Finke. Emil had John Raymond Finke, and their son, John Allen Finke, is my grandpa. John Allen had Robert Allen Finke, and Robert Allen had Andrea.
Holy smokes. That's amazing you can remember it all the way down like that. That's impressive. So is that then like a great, that's like a great-great-grandpa somewhere along the line for you then, right?
So
On that.
Raymond, okay, so John is grandpa, John Raymond is great-grandpa, Charles Raymond is great-great-grandpa, John Longstreth is 3 greats-grandpa.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
Apparently someone doesn't know I'm in a meeting.
That's okay.
I'm not answering it unless it's, no.
So you said that it sounded like they came here because of health.
It's on a website.
Okay.
I can verify it, but it was not for social justice that we're aware of.
Right,
it was
right.
not, they didn't say it was because he didn't have land. Like it wasn't a land grab, which it, probably was, but, and it wasn't, land being provided
For the
by the
homestead.
federal government.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
or for homestead.
Right.
So no, it was not that sort of deal. And he was a farmer. He was a berry farmer. He grew apple apple trees. They didn't think he would successfully grow apple trees up north, and he was stubborn enough to keep trying, and he was successful. And they call John Longstreth Michener in the history of Fillmore County or the history of the Minnesota State book liberal, a staunch temperance, Garrisonian abolitionist, and that what that means is that William Lord Garrison was a white man who believed in like a peaceful approach to ending slavery, that it was a moral issue and you approach it with morality, not with violence, which would be in tune with the Quaker Peace Mission,
Right.
the pacifists.
I think I read something too where it said like throughout his life he was very involved in kind of like social betterment of the
Absolutely.
community. So he's Quaker, he's a farmer. Do you know anything about like his parents or his siblings or his spouse?
No, I haven't. Like, I haven't branched off to know that by heart. I believe one brother, if I remember correctly, it was Brock Michener. It ended up being a medical doctor and was in Northwest Iowa. And if it wasn't a brother, it's a relative. His dad, I have it in my computer, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. One of them was a hat maker, but I don't know that it was him. I think that was another generation or two up.
Okay. And his parents lived in Mount Pleasant, Ohio for, I don't know how far back that went. Do you?
Oh, well, they arrived in 1815,
Okay.
but they did not get buried there. But they were buried in Ohio.
Okay.
So you follow the Micheners, they're maybe born, in the place where their parents were maybe married, but you'll follow through their Quaker records, the meeting house records, traveling west. And so, like, they arrived in Pennsylvania in 1686, I believe it was, with William Penn, or by permission of William Penn and invitation of William Penn, because John and Sarah Michener, who are our Generation 1, were acquaintances of William Penn, and Sarah was actually kind of like a ward of his because she was orphaned as a child, and so William Penn and his wife helped raise her, or at least guided her in her young adulthood. And then John Michener, this is in Sussex, England, was a local man. He wasn't baptized Quaker, but he chose to become Quaker because he made that decision. His father would not give him money or land in his will. And so he knew he wasn't going to be provided that. He ended up in jail prior to his marriage because he attended a Quaker meeting, and that's all documented.
Interesting.
And so he marries this Sarah Moore, who was the ward of William Penn. William Penn is designing Pennsylvania as the great experiment of, religious freedom, social equality, just this big fantasy world.
Right.
And they were invited to participate. So they arrive and start their family in Philadelphia. In the records, I can tell you exactly where their house was. These are people, this is before Ben Franklin. This is the 1680s. Before the Revolutionary era. This is called the colonial era. And when they arrived, the Mayflower Pilgrims had been in Massachusetts for 60 years already. But it's still prior to 1700.
Right.
So, within like 10 or 15 years, they head north. And I've done this trip. I can visualize it.
That's cool.
So they're in a Horsham Township, I believe, in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and they help establish the Horsham Meeting House. And John and Sarah Michener are buried there. They, however, do not have a stone. And I don't remember if I knew there wouldn't be a stone when I arrived. I don't think I understood that. But there is an ancient, graveyard, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm just feeling it 100,000 different ways. And I take a picture of Bartholomew Longstreth. And I'm like, oh, Longstreth. Okay, whatever. Quaker name. I have Longstreth in my, whatever that means. Okay, took a picture. It ends up being Bartholomew is the immigrant from England and my direct ancestor.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So not only are the Micheners, embedded in that history, so are the Longstreths. So I did not touch or see John and Sarah stone, but I did see this one. And then after Horsham, John and Sarah's son William, who is my direct ancestor, ends up in the Plumstead Township of Bucks County, which is just, further north of Horsham. And they set up a meeting house as part of their, faith-based society. And this is all governed under the Philadelphia Society of Friends. And so William and other Micheners are deeply embedded in that history. And then from Plumstead, they go to Buckingham or Abington, I can't remember. I think Abington Meeting House in Buckingham or something like that. And so William is buried there. So he was born in Philadelphia, hit 3 meeting houses before he ends at his last meeting house. His wife, interestingly, her name is Mary Custer, and Mary is a Mennonite. And part of William Penn's grand design was, you have religious tolerance for people of all faiths. So not only was he inviting Quakers, he also was inviting German Mennonites or Germanic Mennonites, which I find interesting because I just really wasn't aware of that.
Right.
So when I was stalking Sarah and building her family tree, because my whole goal in genealogy originally was I want to know where every surname comes from.
Sure.
So that you can kind of get an idea. Well, I'm 12% this or what. That was like the driving force. So she came from Germany. And then when you build out that family tree, Mary Custer's grandfather was Paulus Custer, and he is the progenitor of General Custer.
Wow.
So however you feel about
Right,
general,
right.
doesn't matter. He comes from a peace-based religion, the Mennonites, and I'm related to him somehow. And he's also raised in Ohio.
Interesting.
So, but then even so, how does William Penn have this connection of being an Englishman, and now you're inviting these Mennonites from Northwest Germany? Well, what people don't realize is his mother was German. And so he had that connection, and so, just worldly connections in, the 1650s or whatever. So that's that first generation. And then the first generation being born in the United States. Then the next generation is Mordecai, and he ends up over in West Grove, London Grove, which is like southwest of Philadelphia. So they went north and now they're southwest. Well, the further south you go, the closer you get to the original Underground Railroad happenings. There's Quakers in southern Pennsylvania, lots of history there. Excuse me. And then eventually Mordecai gives birth to John. John, gives birth to Daniel. Daniel gives birth to John Longstreth. So eventually this family ends up in Mount Pleasant, Ohio, which is a known Underground Railroad.
Okay, dang. That's cool. You didn't even have to look at anything to remember all that. Wow. So, I know me reaching out to you, and you've talked with Carol Jefferson too, so you've been thinking about this for a little while, but you mentioned how you have 3 kids and you've got a job, and this isn't like you're doing this full-time getting paid to do it either. So I know that there's a lot to be researched still, but have you looked at any of those chapters, particularly at their role in the Underground Railroad, those Friends meeting houses or anything?
No, because basically through my conversations with Carol, that was probably the last time I really did purposeful research on the Underground Railroad, and I was then kind of looking at how can I place a known conductor in Minnesota, and what and where and how would he be doing. So one of the big things of the Underground Railroad is they cross a river. You cross state lines, county lines, river. You get a barrier, a different law approach, or a different team who's going to chase you. And so Fillmore County, Etna, is not close to the Mississippi River. But it's territorial era Minnesota, so to look for what potentially could be the effort in Minnesota, you have to understand where those roads were, the traffic. There were still Native Americans in the area. And that is history that I'm familiar with in northern Minnesota and not so much in southern Minnesota.
Sure.
My husband came from fur trappers of northern Minnesota,
Oh, wow.
so I've spent years researching that. So trying to think about how to apply that down here, and kind of I'm very comfortable with the concept of how I would approach that research or what I would be looking for. And Carol helped me a lot, but I haven't had time to do it. So that's kind of where it ended.
Yeah. So Sarah Sturgis, when she was still here, she showed me this map they have that shows all the stagecoach routes and logging trails and stuff, because we were trying to look strategically, because that's Carol's thing, is the territorial roads that were here. And what's fascinating was if you go over toward Harmony, Big Spring, Dayton.
The Damon House. Dayton
Yes,
House,
right? And that guy comes from Underground Railroad background, and he's in with two other people that were kind of early Harmony folks that were they formed a little anti-slavery group, even though I've tried to reach out to Harmony and they're like, we have no record of that. I'm like, it's in the book of the history of, if you read about these 3 guys. One was a Quaker, the Hoag guy, Hoag.
I've read about.
Then you got Stork. And
So I
Dayton.
know some of the Hoag people. My mother went to high school with some.
We
My
gotta
folks
interview them,
graduated.
too.
Well, she's a famous author.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
Yeah. I can't think of her first name, but and I can't remember what type of books they are, if they're like historical fiction. I don't know if it's just fiction. I can't remember, but that surname I was reading while I was reading Iowa Underground Railroad, probably right after you contacted me, and I'm like, I just assumed it was a Norwegian surname, and nope, it's Quaker related.
Right.
And, and Hesper had a meeting house.
That's what I was going to ask you, like, when they got here.
And that's where my mother's family comes from, down around there.
Way.
So Hesper had a meeting house, and then if you go to Springwater, which is straight north of Decorah, kind of would be south of Hesper, that is another church to research. I think it's called Springwater. I'd have to look it up. But it was a Quaker house or a Quaker meeting house at one point. And then also, oh shoot, I'm not going to remember the name. There's another town east of there that should be researched. So like so what I was trying to do was, so Carol, look for the congregation churches. I understand that. I understand the early the early settlers of the Midwest after the fur trapping, era, were the East Coast people. So people think, oh yeah, I'm German and my people homesteaded here and we're the first. And it's like, no, you're not. But it's okay if you want to think you are, that's all right. But if you go a little bit back, there's another era that you haven't had to think about yet. And so if you look at Decorah, was the family was the Day family, and they were East Coast. And there was a fort down there. So the Decorah, Northeast Iowa area was big. Winona's big. But, there's this inland route, too, that you have to process. So to me, there was this huge, I think I'm saying this right, but schism in the Quaker faith where, and it was like in 1827. I have all this on a timeline I typed up. But basically, the schism is called the Hicksite revolt or Hicksite issue. And this Elias Hicks is a Quaker preacher, and he believes you approach, first of all, he was willing to say, I don't agree with slavery. So then, because the Quakers had slaves, I have proof that I come from slave owners. Not only did they own black slaves, they also owned Irish slaves. And that was part of the economic approach for success. It is factual. The Longstreths have a document that which would be John Michener's, ancestors. Oh yeah, it was earlier. So the Longstreths it was 1775, and this lady, Anne Dawson Longstreth, who was the immigrant's wife in 1775, manumitted her slave Solomon in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. She had been married to the Longstreth. He dies. So then she enters her husband's world. He was not a good man. And I think, if I remember correctly, he died. So then she returned to the Longstreth children and spent the rest of her life with them. But when she came from her second marriage, she brought her slave Solomon. And before she died, she manumitted him. And that's in the history books.
Cool. Okay.
So when I was telling my kids about this, because I have one kid who's really into history, the other two will listen, but they don't care as much. I said, Levi, you need to look at this. And I couldn't find it when I was trying to prep for you, but like say in the late 18 teens or maybe early 20s, I said, look at this. That is our ancestor freeing their slaves, with their last will and testament. And I said, now think about it. When was Civil War?
Right.
You know,
Way
so
later.
even if it wasn't as early as 1775, so when I found that in the last couple weeks, I'm like, rock on. That's like, that is at the era of awakening when people are really thinking about it, and she did it.
Yeah, that's a Revolutionary War time
Yep.
when she did it.
Well, the Quakers, the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting forbade Quakers from buying or selling slaves in the 1770s. That meant the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting governed all these meeting houses across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Not like every meeting house, but you know, they had their territory of governance. So that was in the 1770s, they forbade it. The start of the Revolutionary War was 1775. The first American Slavery Society, which was called the Society for the Relief of Freed Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage,
The title.
was formed in Philadelphia in 1775. So we're you know, fighting for freedom and contemplating giving freedom to the people who are helping us make money on principle. You know, like it's just not right. So it's good info.
Right, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
So William Michener, Generation 2, who is a Quaker, a devout Quaker, you know, was a representative, you know, he is very much into this faith. He is listed in the revolutionary documents as a patriot. You know, so you think, oh, he fought for his freedom. You know, he fought against the British. He didn't fight. He gave the Continental Army blankets and paid the supply tax. And so by supporting them in that way,
Supplied resources, yeah.
he's listed as a patriot.
Okay.
And the Battle of Crooked...
Yeah, because he's Quaker. He's not going to want to fight, but I'll support you in another
and
way.
some did,
Yeah,
you know.
right,
like,
right.
But
interesting.
you can see... So this is the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The Longstress lived right outside of... so the Battle of Crooked Billy was like... maybe like less than an acre away from their house.
Wow.
And so... they're living, dealing, you know, Washington and his frozen river issue, you know, that is like, I think like a half hour away in a car.
Crazy.
So like I've been there and I've traveled in these and I drove these roads and, you know, you have all these old references to this era and, you know, I had to try to put my brain into that era. But again, I didn't have time to properly prep. But so we're walking down in downtown Philadelphia. My people walk those streets. I knew that. We could pay money, and I took my grandparents who were in their 80s.
Aww.
It was me and two old people. And we're walking on a hot day, and we're down by the Arch Street Meeting House, and there's this cemetery in downtown Philadelphia. You know, the Liberty Bell's like a block away. Betsy Ross's house is a block away, or maybe even just across the street. And it was like we could pay to enter this cemetery to look at Benjamin Franklin's
Oh my gosh.
grave.
Wow.
And we're like, it's hot. I'm not paying money. We're not doing it. Okay, so that's like, oh yeah, we read the sign, whatever, but we just weren't going to do it. Well, when I do more research through the Black Ledges,
They're
which
buried
is,
there?
well, I don't remember if they're buried there, but through one of the mothers of the Black Ledges is a Duffield, and a Duffield was the executor of Benjamin.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh
Benjamin
my
Franklin's
gosh,
will.
I get goosebumps when you find all those things.
So I am not a direct descendant of him, but
There's
of
a
the family.
connection. Yeah. Holy moly.
So I work at the grad school at Mayo Clinic, and so I'm working in a science research lab. I don't do it, but you know, I'm with scientists all day long, and I have this student named Duffield. And I've been wanting to talk to her, and I'm like, gosh, how dorky am I willing to like be in front of her? And finally, I'm like, I met her in a meeting, and I'm like, if you have time to call me, give me a call. I have something to talk to you about, and it has nothing to do with work. This is like when you want to breaks. Okay. So she calls me immediately. I'm like, where are you from? And she's like, well, I was raised in Rochester. I'm like, well, do you know anything about your last name? And she's like, or I said, do you know anything about Duffields? Like, do you know where you're from? And she's like, Well, I know we're like Pennsylvania Dutch.
Oh my gosh. So
And
you're
I-
related to her somehow?
I have no idea. But so I kind of gave her a rundown, and she's like, I know nothing about that. I just know we come from Pennsylvania. She goes, my mom might be interested in this. And I said, the Benjamin Franklin thing. And I said, then on top of all of this, the very weird thing is this book of Minnesota state history is written by an Edward Duffield Neal.
Huh.
And so the Michener naming pattern is you often get a surname of like your mother's surname or whatever. So I don't know who Edward Duffield Neal is, but he likely,
Right.
has a little background back that way.
Oh my gosh, that is so crazy.
So
Holy moly. Wow.
So the Underground Railroad, they say he was active. We know there's different routes. We know there's documented history in Indiana. There's documented history in Ohio. We know people from like Missouri were coming up through Iowa and Illinois and, Canada. You have to go through Minnesota to get through Canada, kind of, sort of. So whether he did it in Indiana or Minnesota, I cannot decipher.
And when he was in Indiana, what area of Indiana, what towns, do you know? Because I forgot to pull that up.
No, that's okay. I've got it right here.
Because I didn't dig around Indiana. When I searched the Mount Pleasant, like, jackpot, but he was a kid there, right? He left there as a teenager?
Mm-hmm. So let's just do it this way. John Michener was born in 1819. In the 1830s, that's when they presume the Underground Railroad started. So that would put him in his teenage years. In the I was reading something last night, and there was a reference to 1827 as being the start of the Underground Railroad. I'm not certain. But Levi Coffin's house, which is a famous stop, is in Fountain City, so it was called Fountain City back then, and it's called Freeport now, or vice versa, I can't remember. Wayne County, Indiana. Well, the Michener children, some of John's children, were born in Wayne County, Illinois.
Wow.
Or Indiana.
Yeah.
So Nat Turner's rebellion, which happened in Virginia, was in 1831. And so that's not placing, our family in that story, but that's going to make an impression on people if you read.
Right.
And there were publications all over, some were published in, Ohio, but, national publications about the abolition, so there was information to receive and process.
Right.
And the Quakers, they're 50 years into saying slavery should end, by the 1830s. So it's not really shocking at all to think that our family had abolitionist ideation. It's the action.
Right.
And then to prove the action, the fact that it's documented in a document, I understand how that can be questioned. But until you can disprove that,
right?
Exactly.
No, I totally agree. So, do you know when he leaves Ohio, he goes into Indiana? Is he a farmer this whole time, or is he doing some other things?
As far as I know, he's a farmer. There is some writings on that.
Okay.
But I do want to go into some specifics. That is not going to, it's going to help you to talk you through it. Help me when I placed it out, and it's probably not new to you, but I'm just going to share it.
Do it.
So, William Lloyd Garrison was a white abolitionist. He was from Massachusetts. He published The Liberator and was part of what became the American Anti-Slave Society, which believed in legally mandated temperance in addition to the abolition of slavery, no drinking. So the uptight where I come from, or what I have sometimes, I think that's also genetically imprinted. We'll talk about that later. But okay, so we say, William Lloyd Garrison, white, anti-slavery dude. In the newspapers, there's things you can read. They go and speak across the country. Quaker houses often hosted these people. And John would be, in his teens, early teens for this. So this white guy, and, with other influences too, but most definitely proximity and topic, Charles Lennox Raymond is also from Massachusetts, and he's a black anti-slave abolitionist speaker, orator, however you want to say it. And he came to Massachusetts as a free black man because his people were free in the Caribbean, if I remember correctly. So his perspective is different because he was born with that privileged status, but that area had tons of slaves, for the sugar plantations, whatever. So his perspective's different. Of course, it's natural for him to say these people should be free. He has the impression or similar ideation with William Lloyd Garrison. These people all know each other, talk to each other. Their big brains talk. They have a lot of respect for each other. And Garrisonian abolition approach is a peaceful approach. It's you morally choose to live this life. And we don't agree with that, so it is our duty to help, okay? So Charles Lennox Raymond, and remember that name, Charles Lennox Raymond, also is published, whatever. So these people then influence a young Frederick Douglass, who was an ex-slave, so a black man, well-known, just famous dude. Great speaker, all these people are being printed and getting exposure, and the Quakers are very much in support of this. Mm-hmm. So when I tell you there isn't a lot of documented history of the Minchiners actually being involved in this movement, please note, okay? And I about died when I put this together. In 1844, John Longstreth Michener and his wife give birth to their first child.
And what did they name it?
Charles Raymond.
Oh my gosh.
And Raymond is spelled Remond. And I thought, what kind of name is that? I have never read that in the film or in the Quaker history. There is no Raymonds. That looks French. What is that? So then, while I'm reading about Frederick Douglass, probably after meeting Carol Jeffers and knowing he actually was in Winona, Minnesota, in 1844, the same year my John Longstreth named his son Charles Raymond, Frederick Douglass named his son Charles Raymond.
Oh my gosh.
So when you can't find proof, you find proof.
Right.
You have to look for it.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. That's pretty
The
cool.
second son had the traditional naming pattern.
Huh.
And in 1844, when this birth occurred, they were living in Indiana. And Frederick Douglass's child named his son up in Massachusetts the same name. And then, just to give that a little perspective, Charles Raymond Lennox, or Charles Lennox Raymond, was about 30 years old when these men are naming their kids after them. So think of how much that impression, he's a young man, he's giving such an impression to these people, they're going to name their kids after him. So the downfall is in 1840, it must have been in the 1847, they were going to go on this circuit speaking thing. Charles Lennox Raymond, Frederick Douglass, and William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison ends up sick and isn't part of it. But at that era, the ideation of Frederick Douglass went away from the peaceful approach to accepting the fact that this is going to have to get political and there's a potential for violence. And so their friendship kind of altered after that because their approaches were going to be different. But in the history books, John Michener is a Garrisonian abolitionist, and he did not participate in the Civil War. So that tells you, he even though when he, in that bio, they said he never participated or signed up for a church.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, how did he practice once he was here? But
he didn't. So I spent a long time trying to figure that out because there are hints in Fillmore County of Quakers. Well, there's a lot of Quakers in Fillmore County if you look, but northeast of Spring Valley, can't think of it, what it's called, Pleasant Grove maybe, something Grove. There was a Quaker meeting house over there. And I thought, and I think, well, I'm not going to say, I'm not sure, but that's an area to research. But everything tells me that from the biography, he just did not participate in organized religion. But that's okay because you can maintain your Quaker faith and you don't have to go and do the 7 stations of the cross. How many stations? 12? 7? 6? I can't remember. The stations of the cross. 10 stations of the cross. But you know what I mean. So the Quakers believed that you could have a personal commune with God. You did not have to go to church to do it. They reference it as your inner light. The creed, what we would think of as the creed, the text, the books, the, oaths, whatever. That is a product of your relationship with God, where other religions would say that is, God in paper form or whatever. Those are God's words, and we, this is just as important. Where the Quakers believe your relationship with God, you have that personal access to Him. You don't have to go through a pastor to do it or a priest to do it. And so when he, as a young man, is going through the Hicksite schism, which affects, the communities, not just the households, not just the churches, I think it's okay for him to say, I'm not doing it. So he enters another new territory. Minnesota, it's not developed to the point where, there's options. Etna had a church, but I don't know that's something I want to learn is what was that church? Cherry Grove, their building of a church didn't happen until the 1890s. And I believe it might be fair to say Etna kind of existed before Cherry Grove, Forestville, we'd have to put it on a timeline for that. But Cherry Grove is developed as an evangelical United Brethren, and part of that was part of the Hicksite schism. The Brethren are different than Quakers, but the evangelical movement was getting so powerful where you have your sermons, you sing your songs. It's more of a social, we must do this as a community, this is must. Where the Quakers, they prayed in silence. You go sit, and if you chose to stand and say, you could, but you didn't have to. They were equal. The women could be a pastor, which is, I don't even know how they phrased it, but, a woman can lead the meeting house session. It didn't have to be a man. When I was in Pennsylvania, I learned that the men sat on one side of the church, and the women sat on the other side, and they kind of had their own groups. But the guy told me it wasn't that the women couldn't hear the business of the church. It was more to provide the privacy and modesty of what women are going to want to talk about when they gather.
Sure.
So it was respectful approach.
Yeah.
Now, a Quaker scholar might approach that very different, but that was what a modern day Quaker told me in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I think when you leave England, because you don't have the right to practice whatever religion you want, you're actually at risk of losing your life. People were burned in England for not following the right religion. You come for freedom to the New World, and then within years that New World is built on the slave labor. Mm-hmm. So of course that's something you're going to think about, and they did, and they talked about it, and it developed. And so it's not that a simple human can't understand slavery is wrong, but you have to move forward. So like, if we know it's wrong, what are you going to do about it? They chose to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about like Carol's approach of looking at congregational churches as those frontier churches that are kind of the first ones coming through, and you have the American Missionary Association, which is an abolitionist organization, specifically we are slowing the spread of slavery so it does not move into these free territories. So that makes sense. But you got a lot of people that aren't Congregationalists. And I'm thinking even these three guys in the Harmony area, he talked about how they formed a little literary society or something. So you have other ways people can gather, and it's spiritual. It's sharing deep thoughts. Those, like you said, big brains gather together. So trying to find even documentation of any groups like that. And like I said, he mentioned that Stort guy mentioned it in the Harmony area, but I haven't been able to find any papers that have been preserved from that.
Well, there's a Methodist church in Harmony, so I would start there. And my dad grew up in that church. I don't know. My dad would probably have an idea, but I don't know if it was Methodist from the beginning. The Methodist church in Lenora is a place to research.
Right, and we looked into that Reverend Dyer guy, but I even bought his autobiography, and he was one of those where it was the revival, come in, amen to Jesus, we are now Christian, and then move on to the next town. And so...
Yeah, a circuit speaker.
He doesn't leave a whole lot of evidence that he was very committed to abolitionism, but doesn't mean that he maybe wouldn't have helped somebody if he would have seen somebody along the way. But he was involved with that Lenora church, I know, that Dyer guy. And we were trying to find a connection because Dyerville in Iowa, that was a huge Underground Railroad stop.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the Bullards, is it Bullard? Sarah Bullard Nelson, who ends up in Red Wing. She grew up in Dyerville before coming. So there's these little connections, and she was abolitionist work for the Freedmen.
There's a Dyer who works in Rochester right now. I don't know his story, but I know him.
But I don't know if they're related to this same Reverend Dyer,
I know.
Right? But it's always.
But he's a PhD. He might know. He might not know, but he might know.
I love it.
I don't know a lot about that history because I just haven't spent the time.
Yeah, I've even looked into Forestville because they were very progressive for the time, and they were from New York, the Meehan's and the I forget the other ones that came with them, but. One thing my husband pointed out, because my husband was assistant manager at Forestville for a while, and he's like, well, Charles Meehan was really good friends with Ignatius Donnelly. And Ignatius Donnelly, now he kind of flip-flopped. He was big Irish Catholic, but he became very progressive, like the Grange, and he started really pushing anti-slavery stuff at some point in his life, but he didn't start out that way. So I was like, but you can really start reading into things when you're trying to find
exactly
connection. But I think stagecoach routes, when we talk about roads, we talk about what would connect Mishner, where he's at, because he's kind of on the western edge of if you start moving closer to the Mississippi, you start hearing a lot more.
But he would have access to the Root River.
Yes.
And
Root River
in fact,
and stagecoach routes.
The Root River, it was written in the document, the Root River crossed his property in one corner.
Okay. So. And when I was at Olmsted County History Center, I interviewed Wayne Ganaway there because he did some big paper on Frederick Douglass and Frederick Douglass coming to Minnesota, and it was very interesting. So I interviewed him about that, but then I started asking what, and he was fairly new to Olmsted County as far as the history guy there. But I said, what have you heard about abolitionists, Underground Road? He's like, not a whole lot. And then I started asking him about, there's one lady who grew up in Harmony that I used to work with told me about, she had heard rumors of Quakers at Dresbach that were involved in the timber trades helping move freedom seekers. And when I mentioned that to him, he talked about some logging trail that went from the Mississippi River right through past Rochester. So where do we find out more information?
So, well, I can tell you some of that because I found it.
Because I know you were sending me information on roads, so.
I don't have the roads, but so when I met with that Carol lady, I have to put timelines together. That just helps me.
That's smart. I should do more of that.
So James Norton, have you heard of him?
Yes.
Guess where he came from? Mount Pleasant, Ohio.
No way.
And he worked in the lumber industry. And guess what?
Laird Norton.
The Mitchners worked in the lumber industry.
Oh my gosh. Interesting. See, that's what we got to see. First of all.
So the Mitchners, when they married, I mean, there's a little more to that, but.
Yeah.
So this would be post-Civil War lumber industry. One of the Mitchners' daughters married someone who had a lumber yard on the north edge of Mille Lacs Lake in Wellthwood. But that's another thing that I'm kind of researching because I don't know when all that started. And then this Mitchner, who was named Charles Raymond, he marries a Canadian who, if you go back, they went from New York, and then when things got hot, they went north, and then she ends up in Minnesota. And she is bossy. Like when Cherry Grove Church in the 1890s was like, we're going to have this evangelical United Brethren church, she says, and she's French Canadian. She says, well, okay, she's from French Canada, but her last name was Brown, so she maybe was English. Sure. I don't know how much I know about her, but she's like, we should not have a church with weekly services and not speak English. We shouldn't be doing German. But then it said, because I just read that this morning, they're like 50% of the people, maybe of the preachers, maybe knew English, but really only a quarter of them could speak it fluently. Sure. Because of course, Fillmore County got loaded with all the
immigrants started coming.
Well, I mean, the Dutch. I mean, and I come from that history too, but they flooded the area. Sure. I mean, the Norwegians, you find pockets of them over by Cherry Grove, but it's Dutch, a lot of Dutch, and some German, but a lot of Dutch. The Finke's are not, my Finke surname entered Fillmore County when a Mitchner was on Mille Lacs, and they met there.
Oh, interesting.
The Finke's are not, they came from the Blue Earth area, which is where she's from. But so the Finke's, it's a name that is going to die out. It's German, so it's not Dutch. It's not old New England. So for now, people are familiar with that surname, but that will be lost. People will not be familiar with that in the future.
Sure. Huh. Yeah. So the lumber trails, logging trails. Yeah, and this Norton guy, she's been looking into Norton and Laird because which one of them had a summer place in Dover along a major stagecoach route and then was in Winona in the winters. And she's like, this is pretty sus with this guy had a, kind of connections to abolitionist type stuff.
Yep,
too.
and Mount Vernon Township of Winona County was getting settled in 1855, and there was a site called Hall's Landing, where the Crazy Castle was. So when you read about that, in that area, and it's an M. Burns Bartholomew. That's a possible Civil War vet. That's someone I zoned into, and I'd like to research him. Sumner Township, Norton Township in Winona County used to be called Sumner Township. There's a Sumner Township in Fillmore County.
Yeah.
So there's things to research there, but it was changed back to Norton in honor of James Norton, a legislature. So, when people think of Norton Church, Norton Township, which is over by Lewiston, where I grew up, they're going to think, oh, Norton, oh yeah, lumber, whatever. Yeah, the Germans, my Ruprechts have lived there forever. We've been buried there. Blah, blah, blah.
Ruprechts?
Well, I'm not related to them, but
Okay,
I,
yeah, I
know
know
them.
the Ruprecht, yeah.
But so what I'm trying to say is like these German people came in and just, so people's history awareness kind of, they
totally.
just don't realize.
Well, that's what's interesting to me is when I go into the historical societies, the pushback I get from the people that are the history directors saying, you're not going to find nothing. And I'm like, can I show you some things? But then I feel like I'm like, what do you think you are? And it's because I'm not born from here. I'm from Minnetonka area. But I'm like, no, like we've written a different history that we've been handing down, and we skipped, like you said, a whole chapter is missing from that story. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, several chapters.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear what you're saying for sure.
So and then Lewiston, which is where I grew up, that town, they claim to have had Carol claims they had a Quaker family meeting in that area in 1869. And she's like, read the Winona County history book. But we went to, so the site of that, okay, how does it go? United Church of Christ is an offshoot of Congregationalists, right? UCC.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I believe Lewiston had a UCC church before that building turned into the Norwegian Lutheran Church. Lewiston is a kind of a pain in the butt. They had Brethren, German Dunkard Brethren, Presbyterians, so zone into that, a UCC church, and then Catholic Church, which was German and Irish Catholics, and then a German Lutheran church. Well, like Norton had a German church, Silo, and then a church in Lewiston. But that the synod split screwed up the town,
jeepers.
where like, all of a sudden cousins couldn't participate in other people's weddings because you're not part of our church.
Right.
Stupid crap like that.
Ridiculous.
So then at some point the Norwegians were like, screw this, we don't want to be part of your church. So there's 4 Lutheran churches within one township or something like that, like maybe 2 townships. So
yeah, crazy.
But prior to all this German energy, we have the old New England people doing their thing, and so we met with the Norwegian Lutheran Church that must have either taken over the property or there was some sort of affiliation. We thought we would get somewhere there, and we didn't get anything.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking if I really want to zone into that, I just have to go to the Historical Society of Winona. I mean, I can dig around, but the people who might have stuff are dying, and I'm not from there, so I don't get the same exposure. Mm-hmm. And honestly, Lewiston's energy is kind of, I've been there for 45 years. It's kind of, I'm not going to say the right word, but you identify, I am a Wisconsin citizen. Well, I am a Catholic, and it isn't always like friendly. Mm-hmm. That the energy of that town over the years, it's better than it used to be, but you weren't just gonna maybe talk about everything to anybody,
right? No, I think that is because I live in Wabasha. It's similar, and when I was in Plainview, it was similar. It's a small town where there are multiple churches like that, and the town's kind of divided.
It drives me nuts.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I heard about Plainview.
And it's like the intergenerational. Like we've been here since 1870
Good
or
for
whatever.
you.
And it's like I don't know if I'll ever feel like I actually am from here because
that's what I tell people.
How people look at me, and it's like I've lived most of my life here. I've moved here in the 90s, but
nope. I tell people, well, I'm from Lewiston, and you're gonna think I'm a Lewiston person, but the people from Lewiston don't think, because my people aren't buried here. My people are buried in Fillmore County or Winneshiek County. So like, I'm a local, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's sad. In the 1980s, like, whatever. Yeah. But that's the reality.
Right. No, for sure. I totally get that. So now that I know more about Lewiston, Enterprise. Mm-hmm. Okay, that town also is like a big suspicious, like, because that was the funnel for like all that.
So
movement.
I know someone who you should probably talk to, and I can't promise that you would. His name is Michael Daly. Mike Daly, Daley.
Yeah, the Daly family, they're big.
Yep, but he's in his early 80s and he's sharp.
Okay.
His family, if you go different generations, different surname, are from Enterprise Valley. They own part of Enterprise Valley right now.
Wow.
I don't know what kind of info he has, and I would go with you because I'd want to hear what he had to
that'd be
say.
awesome.
But he would be someone to talk to. Whether you get anything, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting, there's all these things as you're talking this is all if you are open to the possibilities, and then there's a little bit of imagination in there. But the French fur traders, because Carol, once there's this article, you probably saw, the Washington Post picked it up. It ended up the Affiliated Press. It's everywhere. She's getting calls and emails from people all across the country.
Like right now again?
This was several years ago, right?
Yep.
So she's like getting calls from people in St. Cloud and out by Spirit Lake, Iowa, saying, well, my great-grandma told a story about Underground Railroad here, and da-da-da-da-da. And so she has a friend who's kind of a historian who had started looking at the ox cart trails heading up the Red River, and that being a way, because skin color, you could blend in. And actually there's very few, but there are some documented stories of like Black Dakota, Black Ojibwe.
Right? Bonga family.
Yeah. So,
which my husband's family is there. My husband is a direct descendant of William Aiken, the Scottish fur trader.
Okay.
Who came to, the Northwest Territory around 1800. 1815 maybe, but whatever. But my husband, so this fur trader then ends up marrying into the Ojibwe family. My husband is a direct descendant of Chief Broken Tooth Catawba of Sandy Lake.
Wow.
And then a direct descendant or cousin. I mean, he's definitely related to him. I just can't prove one generation. Chief Hole in the Day.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So I've done all of that.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to, and I don't know how to reach out to the tribal nations in that region to know what.
Well, I know a guy who's studying the treaties, the land.
Yeah.
So my husband's direct ancestor, in like say 1917 or whatever, testified against the federal U.S. government about the crap that was happening with the land allotments.
Wow.
And his when they did the Dawes Act and they tried to figure out, how Indian are you by looking at your physical features, he has a profile on there.
Oh my gosh.
And he is a well-known Indian, but because he came from that fur trader, he's a half-breed.
Yeah.
Which is a totally different experience.
Right.
But that's all, I have my husband's, in the oral history of the Ojibwe, and because he comes from the chiefs, they have oral history back to like the 1400s because the Ojibwe come from St. Lawrence
Right,
Seaway.
the whole migration. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Well, so I mentioned because the Red River ox cart possibility, and like nobody talks about that, but like let's be open-minded here, especially if there's money involved. People are willing to do, like, you pay me, I don't care, I won't talk, just hop in.
Well, and so one way to look at it would be find out what John Jacob Astor's thoughts were on the abolitionist,
right?
Because he was the American Fur Trade Company's owner or whatever. John Jacob Astor fired William Aiken from his fur trading business, and the claim was William Aiken was using booze to make deals with Indians, which was not surprising.
No,
whether it's true or not. I tend to think it is true. Well, then I was watching something about them the other day, and they just slid into, it's perceived that William Aiken, no, it was either William Aiken or the half-breeds of that area. Well, they were part of alcohol distribution thing. And I'm like, that's probably true because William Aiken's daughter marries a soldier who's likely half-breed, but I can't prove it. And they end up in Texas in the 1860s and 1870s all the way up to 1881. And they're alcohol distributors down there.
Oh my gosh. Like you're going to say, like she marries into Anheuser-Busch or something.
Yeah, no, but these Indians,
Right.
Ojibways are now, it was down at where Texas hits Mexico at Fort Ringgold, whatever. Can't think of the words. But anyway, so why on God's
Right.
green earth are you down there?
Right.
Well, he was probably stationed there. He is documented as being from New York, but these Ojibwe people, they're everywhere. And so is he New York, but a half-breed, but just marked as a soldier, and you don't have the
Right.
documentation, whatever. Right. Is he was born in Canada, so then is he fully white? Chances are not.
Yeah. Did Carol talk to you about the Jeffrey family over by Hart?
I don't know how much she went into it.
So there's a family there, these Jeffreys. They were originally in Connecticut, then New York, friends with Frederick Douglass. I mean, they're like doing abolitionist stuff out there. They're in Michigan before they come here. Michigan, the spot where they're at, there was an Underground Railroad incident where an escaped slave was helped across the Great Lakes. So it's like coincidence. Then they come here. And so she's like, oh, okay, these Jeffreys. Some of the census records show them biracial. Some of them show like mulatto. Mm-hmm. Some say black, some say white. Come to find out, interviewing some of the descendants, they're multiracial. So they're indigenous, they're white, and they're black. And then you start looking closely, and there's like 13 different families because they're all related. They all came together, but because it was a big family of girls and then they married into other, like, the names become more
Does she have the family tree built?
European. She doesn't even use Ancestry. She won't pay for it.
I do it for other people.
And I'm like, dude, you have like a ton of money. She won't pay for Ancestry.
I bet you she's afraid someone's going to scalp her research.
No, she just doesn't, like, Ancestry bothers her. She'll use everything else out there that's free. But anyways, there's other people that have researched this. Like, she thought she discovered it. Like, there's been people researching this family for years. So even on Ancestry, there's tons of stuff that people put
Well,
up years ago.
I need to talk to her again. Is she in a good state right now, or you don't
Well,
know?
she's trying to finish this book.
Oh, so leave her alone for a while.
Because she's like, I want to have a life again. And I was like, if you would just stay focused on, like, Winona.
There's drugs to help for that.
She's incredible, and she's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. Like you can recall these facts, and she's like that too. But it's like she needs to, like, narrow in.
I don't have an autism diagnosis, but we talk about the spectrum a lot at my house.
Oh, man. So anyhow, I totally went off on a tangent there. So that family is this. You can't trust the census, I guess, is where I was going with that.
Oh, absolutely not.
Because there's a couple things there too, and I was talking to Sarah Sturgis about this because she was one of those too, where she's like, well, she was researching black settlers in Chatfield, and she had tracked down, and she's still working on that even though she's not here anymore. But she's like, you're not going to find a whole lot, blah, 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 blah. And then we got into the conversation. You can't trust the census records, right?
Nope.
Two things going on there. What if the census taker is an abolitionist? So
And
he
chooses
doesn't
not
even
to.
note. He doesn't
Yeah.
even note race because of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said we should do a study on looking at who the census takers were and then what their affiliations were. But then also sometimes they were just like color of skin. They would just take a guess based on color of skin.
Oh, absolutely.
So they don't know what the hell they're putting down. So there's like a lot of things you
We
can't
were
trust
so
there.
hoping that my husband was related to the Bonga family. Just because they were acquaintances and friends and whatever, but his DNA didn't show any African, and my kids were so pissed.
I was going to mention DNA too,
Oh, I've
because
done
this
it.
whole idea of like if people were moving up through the Red River, ox cart trails toward Canada, then you would think that as people are doing DNA and looking at their family, like, where the hell is this black coming in, right? Like you'd start to see that, but who's doing that? Especially if we're talking indigenous.
Well, especially when like
trusting
the
DNA,
less than 2% or less than 3% can be almost.
it's watered
like-
down so much by now.
Well, yeah. So my husband. So that was why we did it, or I got it for a gift. I was kind of like Carol, but probably mostly just because I wasn't going to spend the money on it because I'm raising kids.
Right,
but my
right.
dad and Sandy, or my folks who live in Minnetonka, by the way,
No way!
Excelsior.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Excelsior, I'm from Minnetrista, so just past that. That's crazy.
So they live in a neighborhood outside of where the Minnetonka Golf Course used to be,
Oh my
like
God.
right by that Cub, like a neighborhood or two away from the Cub Foods.
Oh my,
41.
I drive Highway 7. like
Yep,
that way to go
exactly.
up to my
So
dad's.
7 and whatever, it doesn't matter.
That's
in that
crazy.
area, but she's not from there.
Sure.
Okay, so they gave this to me for Christmas. So me and my husband. So mine is like exactly what you would expect. Like I've like done the percentage. Like I have a chart that says they predicted genetic. Like what
Yeah.
you would predict
Yeah.
by the nation of origin and what I got. And I'm like, fuck. This is like not even interesting. Okay. But it proved it. Okay, so like I'm like, okay, whatever, Then I get my husband's, and we're so excited because the Native American did show up. I mean,
Oh,
he
wow.
is so. I mean, the last full blood would have been born in like that you think is full blood, but might not be. Is born in 1815. Can you have a
Wow.
kid then if you're at 50? In 1850, that puts you at what, 35? Yeah. So the last full-blooded that we know of, and that lady has a kid with William Aitken in 1850. And so then that's 50% in 1850, Ojibwe.
Dang.
You know, calculations. But so we saw the Native American show up. Interestingly, Filipino showed up, which, you know, the migration of the Indians, that might just be another Indian type, you know, DNA. Then what you would expect, he has old New England and he has some German/Dutch or something. The Jew, so this half-breed Jew, this half-breed Indian, in like 1905 marries a Lithuanian Jew in northern Minnesota, because of course the Jews are in northern Minnesota, but people don't always know that. And so his Jew showed up, you know, I come from Russian Jew. Oh, really, Pat? Like, I don't know if I believe that, but whatever. It was proven. And now I have the paper trail to prove it too. You know, like all this, you know, thing. And then there's 25% Swede.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell is going on? So I'm not even going to go down that route, but just know we figured out someone wasn't a parent.
Oh.
The presumed parent was not the parent.
Yeah.
But that just put me on a path to get that much deeper into his history, which built my knowledge of all of that much more.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah. I got my DNA story is a story for another day, but it's crazy. And there's black. There's black.
cool.
And we were always told it was indigenous. That's what my grandma went to the grave saying we're Cherokee.
Because that was better.
And Cherokee is like such a rumored thing, right? And yeah, I don't think, I think that's what she believed. I think that's what she was told. But you blend in more and you're more maybe accepted. And during those times when she was growing up, if you were Native American versus black, because I think civil rights, all that stuff was going on when she was little. But yeah, so then tracing my family lines, like there's slaveholders on every freaking branch of the tree. And I'm like, oh my God.
But so then you're from the South then too?
Yeah, so I mean, our people came over pre-Revolutionary War too, but then they were following the coastline down and then across the South and then end up in California and West Coast.
So what were some of your surnames?
So Hickman, who, this is freaking crazy. You're talking about being in the cemetery and whatever and all these things, but I'm up at so Elise Hill is a black researcher who researches like Underground Railroad and formerly enslaved people, helping people find their ancestors who were, you know, enslaved. And she met Carol because of that Washington Post article called Carol. They started connecting, and then Carol introduced me to her. So Elise, she lives in Georgia, but she's originally from Minneapolis. And she comes back a couple times a year to visit her mom. And she was doing research on this Pilgrim Baptist Church in St. Paul, because Reverend Hickman was a black man from
I'm pretty sure I just was reading
Missouri
about him.
who
Oh yes, I
technically it was Civil War. He was considered contraband at the time, and makes a way up the river with a bunch of other like freedom seekers, and there's like a Union steamboat that like kind of hauls him up. And so anyways, once he gets to St. Paul, he founds the Pilgrim Baptist Church. So they just worked with her. She did all this research. They got the site listed on the National Park Service Network to Freedom. Blah, 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 blah. So she was in town, so I wanted to hear her presentation. I met her. I went up there and, you know, went to the church. It was their Founders Day. It was just this fall, sitting there listening. Reverend Hickman. And as I'm sitting there listening, I'm like, you know, it's funny because my DNA, my biological dad is not the dad who raised me. So my dad that raised me is Scandinavian. I mean, he's like 75% Norwegian, and then there's Swedish and some other stuff. But
So what was that surname?
so that was Otterson,
Okay.
that side.
Oh yeah, that's where you're.
Yeah, and they're from Minnetonka area. So this Hickman's like a totally different. Luckily, this Hickman guy has blue eyes too, because otherwise it was like I don't look anything like my dad. And I don't look anything like my sister.
Is your dad a dark Scandinavian?
No, he's blue eyes, blonde
Okay.
hair. Yeah. And so my sister is actually his kid.
Okay.
But there's like
Yep,
a whole
yep, I get it.
soap opera that, whatever. So anyhow, I'm sitting there, Hickman, that's my biological dad's name. And he was a friend of my mom's. And I've like learned since, like, my dad knew that there was a possibility I wasn't his kid, but he didn't care because he's like, you're my kid. From here on out, you're my kid, whatever. So I'm like, Hickman. So then she's giving her presentation about this Reverend Hickman, where he's from in Missouri, how his enslaver ran a ferry on one of the rivers down there for people on the Oregon Trail. And I'm like, that's interesting because the Hickmans that I descend from, the guy gave me a book on their family, and they ran a ferry in Missouri for people on the Mormon Trail. And I'm like, what are the chances there's these two Hickmans that are both running ferries? And as she's giving her presentation, she's giving all these dates and names and everything. So then I'm like, holy shit. So I go back home that night on Ancestry, and I'm like typing in the stuff into my family tree, and I'm like, holy crap, this black man that ends up in St. Paul was enslaved by, it would have been like
your people.
4 times great grandpa's that line down. But they're connected. Because I just thought, Hickman's probably a common name. Wow, what are the chances
English.
of anything
Doesn't
to
mean
do?
we're related, but let's be real. The potential exists.
What are the freaking chances? And then I'm sitting in this church thinking, oh my God, like, my ancestors might have enslaved this guy. Like, I kind of wanted to sneak out of there. Like, I was super, like, scared. Like, oh, this is really embarrassing. I got to meet a lady that was sitting in front of me, and she came with her 2 little kids. And she's like, my children are descendants of Reverend Hickman on their dad's side. And so her and I connected because she's trying to learn more about the family tree. But I'm like, I think my ancestors enslaved the Reverend Hickman. Like, this is freaking crazy.
So what church did he belong to?
So
did you say Baptist?
It was Baptist church that this formerly enslaved man was a member of. But I don't know our people. I say our, they're not, I don't know anything about this family, really. The Hickmans, I don't know what they were. I mean, there was a branch that went Mormon, and they actually headed out west.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What about Mormons and Underground Railroad? Were they part of that?
So I just learned about this last year because we took a trip out to Salt Lake City. There was a big Hickman family reunion, and my aunt then took me to some of these graveyards. They are all like, they've got the plaques, the Mormon pioneers. They were on the Mormon trail. I was like, oh
I've never heard that term before until you just said it.
Yeah, it was really weird. And then, so then I'm like, well, I'm interested in abolitionists and Underground Railroad. Do you know what role the Mormons played in that? And she's like, I've never really looked into it, but I believe they were against, there were Mormons that had slaves. Actually, this guy that is my biological dad, it would have been his great-grandpa was a slave owner. Or no,
that's not that far.
Had slaves, but they were in Virginia. That's before they became Mormon, though, so they weren't Mormon yet.
Yeah, do you know when that happened? I don't know. My daughter's
1850s, because it was like the big stuff was like Oregon Trail, same time, and then as the Civil War is kicking off, the Mormons are being slaughtered by the U.S. as well at the same time as the Civil War, and they're chased out west. And even once they get out west, the U.S. government's like trying to attack them in the mountains of Utah. It's crazy. And I just learned all this stuff.
Well, my daughter's dating a Mormon right now. And so I'm in tune with a little bit, and from southern Iowa. So that's why I was wondering, because then my husband's East Coast people were North Carolina. I don't believe I've read the word Quaker, but Protestants. And they come through Kentucky, and there was like pastor after pastor after, like 6-7 generations of pastors, all the way to my husband. My husband was conceived by a pastor in an illegitimate affair.
Interesting.
Anyways, so I'm tracking these people. That's why I was wondering, because they came, I don't think of like Quakers, which is stupid because the more I read, I realize, but I didn't realize there was like the southern western movement, like North Carolina up to Canada, but that's all south stuff.
Yeah.
And so like Mormons, Oregon Trail, Missouri, which is the south.
They're like right down the middle. They're kind of that, considered that was the south, I guess, if you're talking about slavery, but they were kind of going right down the middle there.
Well, in southern Iowa is just a hotbed for all of that.
Because what was it? I don't know history real well, but
she's Catholic.
John Smith. No, not John Smith. Who was the first? He gets murdered, and then it becomes Brigham Young, the guy before him.
It's John Smith. I think you're right.
Brigham Young.
I think you're right.
I can't remember the Smith guy. Joseph Smith.
Oh, okay.
He was like the prophet, the one that supposedly God talked to or whatever. This angel is whatever. Every religion has some real interesting
We just don't always have 1800s like prophet interactions.
Right. But so that guy in New York, they started getting a bunch of backlash. So then they moved to I believe it was Missouri, because they were told that was the promised land. But then once they're established in Missouri, they start getting backlash. That's when Joseph Smith is murdered, I think, in Missouri. So then Brigham Young brings them to Utah.
See, and I don't even know
And
that
they were
much.
persecuted. But, it was like the whole, the guys can have 10 wives. I think that was really what got people.
I can't remember. Do you have any, East Coast history? I didn't think so.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I just can't remember right off the top of my head. What's your mom's? She was what was her surname? It was weird, right?
England.
But,
Engelen.
oh yeah,
It's-
there's a
it's
good
Dutch.
chance you actually, oh, she's Dutch.
Yeah.
So you have,
I know, so my dad was born in Belgium.
Okay.
And they came through Ellis Island. And a lot of his relatives got as far as Monroe, Michigan.
Okay.
A lot of Belgium Catholics are in Monroe, Michigan. And then eventually, a lot of them ended up in Mankato. And so that's where they're, but
so we need
As
to
far
look
as
at your
East
mom
Coast,
because
yeah.
it might be if she's Dutch, because
I don't know, other than my dad being born in Belgium, I know that's that generation came over. I don't know when mom's generation came over. And then we were talking about my husband's
yes.
side. The last name is Connor. We're assuming Irish, but we're trying to find his great-grandfather, where he's buried, or where he came from, or who came over, and if indeed it's Ireland. Or,
Yeah, so how much have you done with the railroad assisting the actual railroad? Does that tie in, or have you done anything with that?
You read it comes up a lot when we're talking about the Underground
Yeah.
Railroad. People actually using the railroad and then steamboats.
Both Brian's grandpa and my grandpa worked on the railroad. That was
Yeah. So I'm just thinking,
Yes.
like,
Well, see, that's part of this, why the ox cart thing came into my mind too. When I think of Enterprise, I was reading, somebody passed along, actually the Lewiston Library had it, I think. It was a book on the history of Enterprise. Somebody wrote it years ago who's like a history
I've read it,
person,
yeah.
right? And they talk about how, like, if you think about pre-railroad, before it got out to Mankato, all the farmers, like west Rochester and west of Rochester, had to haul their wheat to Winona, right? To the same spot today where they still haul the grain.
Yep.
But they funneled down through Enterprise because that's the way the geography was there.
Yep.
And so you had, it talked about these wagons backed up for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles, waiting to cross at Enterprise to get to Winona. So I'm thinking, if you're involved in the Underground Railroad, what a freaking easy way to be moving people, because you've got farmers going all different directions, and they're going to that port in Winona. So that's why I'm always curious. There's so many farmers, and I guess at the time that's going to be what most people are doing. But then postmaster is the other thing that pops up a lot. A lot of these people were postmaster.
and Cherry Grove had a postmaster that had it in that era for like 40 years. He
Oh,
was
wow.
So then he's someone to research
Right,
too.
right. So I don't know. I'm always curious about the transportation piece, and then like, how can we put these people on the map that we know they were abolitionists, and there's some indication they were probably involved in the Underground Railroad, and then what are the common threads that are connecting them? They were farmers. They were, involved in. They were Republican. They were whatever. Like, you can kind of start to look at ways they might have run into each other. Because I was even thinking that today driving down, like, when I'm doing genealogy stuff, I'm seeing how people are like marrying within the similar families. Like, there's a Cravath that married a Cheatham, and the Cheatham guy his obituary said he was in the Underground Railroad, and the Crafts were in the Underground Railroad, but they lived in like 3 towns apart. But if they were all congregational churches, they probably got together for congregational church meetings.
They were supervised by the same
Right?
governing committee.
So I'm thinking, like, how are they connecting with each other? And everything I read on the Underground Railroad seems to indicate they maybe just knew the next stops. Like, the nearest neighbors, that plan B, C, D, E, F, G, if I have to help somebody, this is who they're going to go to. I don't know beyond that, and I don't want to know beyond that, because then, in a court of law, you couldn't be a witness, because you don't know.
What about, what have you read that talks about the naming of townships, and was that a purposeful naming to guide them?
Oh, I don't know about that. It is interesting how you got a lot of New York names and like names that are popping up for, yeah, definitely.
So
Carol says that, but I don't know if she's found any research on it. I think she
well,
just
that's what I
assumes.
want
Yeah.
to do, because
Yeah.
when you read about this Fort Wayne, I have all these tabs pulled up, but I don't know their thing, but all the little towns or townships in the area of that Indiana hot spot, there's a Cherry Grove in there.
Sure.
Now, when you read about the naming of Cherry Grove, it's a guy from
Right, there's a lot of
New
cherry
York,
blossoms
and they wouldn't. But I just feel that these naming patterns, like, was there a saying that they said, or, stay away from this township because that's the name of that township. Go to that one because you're familiar with that, and that's a safer township. That's what I kind of wonder about. He was very political. I mean, if that's written in the document, that's got to be truthful, and they serve the community. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But nothing tells me it happened here.
Right. There's a whole other realm of what Carol's looking at too. I'm sure she told you this, because her way that she got sucked into this was they're trying to get her church listed on the National Register, right? And as she's researching in the church archives, which this church is like early 1850s, as the first people are illegally coming into Winona before it's even allowed, they form this church. And then the records are just, they've never burned. Like most churches, these old records are gone. So she's going through these records and she's like, starting to get red flags. Like, these people are all abolitionists, and many of them, it was chain migration. They were in the same towns where there's known hotbeds of Underground Railroad things happening. And you can find, she's been able to track down like where they signed anti-slavery petitions in other states before they came, like all these red flags. And then she's starting to see a lot of them served in the first legislature here, and they were involved in like making sure slavery was outlawed. So like her gut feeling is it was intentional. They were coming here to make sure slavery did not expand into Minnesota.
Yep. And so their history books may not say that. Right. Purposefully.
And like, how would you prove that without somebody writing that? But it's like all these things seem to indicate it was intentional. But then again, there's the land speculation piece, because they were all land speculators. Like every single one of them is grabbing onto land and now that's, looked on as like, was indigenous land. And so how can you be like,
so
free the slaves, but yeah, we're pushing all the indigenous people out of here.
It's nasty.
The idea was, though, from what I've been told, it was okay because the enslaved people were Christianized. The indigenous people weren't necessarily. So they saw that as, I don't agree with that.
The slave people were Christianized, so it was okay to
help them, but to push the indigenous people out because they weren't accepting,
and that's just
our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Yes.
But that's kind of what the argument at the time was. Like, they could kind of justify it. I don't know.
I don't know enough about that. I just know the corruption of the federal government was bad. It's well documented. Pat's family, my husband's family, has been in on it since about 1800.
Right.
The government had power plays by employing them in the Office of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're still doing that. It's just manipulation. It is not living by Quaker principles, because they are not valuing everybody properly.
Sure.
But now this was a big moment for me in my awareness of this era. I believe it was Chief Broken Tooth, and if it wasn't Chief Broken Tooth, it was Hole in the Day. But so these are a treaty signing. Like Pat's northern Minnesota people were at the Treaty of Prairie du Chien in 1825. Like they traveled to D.C. Like it's just crazy that how well his family's documented. One of these Indians, and I cannot give you the direct quote, but it's the word. In referencing what the federal government or what America, the United States, is doing to these people through treaties, he said, he said to his people, you have to understand, everything they're doing is exactly what we're doing. They're attaining by conquest. It's just different conquest. Mm-hmm. And so if that Indian could understand, my people lost, then these freaking Indians today have to just put that into perspective. You lost that. So if you want to reclaim your land, the law is the way to reclaim your land. You're not going to do it on morality. You got to start buying it, manipulate what you want, but you got to play back and win that. Sure. And they are. Yeah. And it's kind of scary almost what they could be doing. But you get that from the state park shit. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but you know what I mean? Like the Birch Coulee in western Minnesota. Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful that they're getting some of their land back. I have no problem with that. But it affects everything. Sure. Like that transfer back to them, because the more land they get, the more power they'll have if they choose to use it that way. So it's going to be interesting. Very interesting.
Well, it's interesting in the, like you're saying, you uncovered these truths, and it's like, wow, finding that on the Trail of Tears, you had, how was this? You had a mix of things. If I remember right, I think you had indigenous landowners. No, it was black landowners racing to Oklahoma who were freed blacks, but then they had enslaved indigenous people work the land, and then you had vice versa, where you had indigenous slave owners that raced out
power.
there.
I mean, it's all power.
And I mean, granted, that's probably few and far between, but it happened.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, reparations, I think, is a crock.
Yeah,
you just don't do it.
Yeah. Or even after the Civil War, you had like the Buffalo soldiers who went and hunted down Indians, right? They were black soldiers.
And why?
Who had
Because
just
they
become
needed
freed.
employment.
Right. Yeah, it is very interesting to look into those.
Yeah, because if Pat's the first white guy presumed, or no, it would be the second white guy. He's too young to be in the Civil War, but he participated in the Indian Wars. If he's a half-breed,
Right.
He's going all over.
Yeah.
He ends up getting murdered in 1881 in Texas after being discharged from the army. But he's participating as a deputy sheriff to go and collect taxes, and the bandits of Mexicans come and murder him.
Huh.
And that's well documented. So now the widow with two young sons, who's Ojibwe, half-breed Ojibwe, returns to Minnesota at the time White Earth is being developed.
Wow, jeez.
So it's like,
Yeah.
you could just do this
over.
forever.
Okay, a couple last questions here. So, as far as like journals, diaries, letters, anything like that, I mean, we're here at the Historical Society. There's a couple, like this little booklet thing.
I have not read that, so I cannot say.
Let's see, this is written, oh my gosh, like 20 pages. The Lives and Times of Daniel Kinsey Mishner and Ida Lena Blakesley Mishner. This was compiled in 1932 by Carol Kinsey Mishner. So this would be, was Daniel one of John's kids?
Yes.
So this is like 2 generations down. But there's a little booklet here that's got a few photos, but nothing of John. We haven't found anything on John, right? A photo of him?
I have not found a photo of John. I have not found a photo of Charles Raymond. I contacted the Mitchners to see if they would have one. And oofda. So the branch that I found were the ones who stayed local. And that's a family to research to the Broadwaters. The family, they maintained the farm. They were the land, they inherited the farm, but I do not believe they were as political, because one of the other sons ends up being a judge for Fillmore County. This is sons of John. And then one of his sons ends up being an author and a businessman. I don't know if he was part of like a printing, that's huge right there, but he is the one to research, and that is Kinsey Mitchner. Daniel Kinsey Mitchner is the son of John. His son is probably who wrote this.
Carol something?
Yeah, Carol Kinsey Mitchner is someone to research for sure. Research what he chose to write about. And I would think, because he built his life in the Twin Cities, I would think the Historical Society might have some info on that.
So are you in touch with any other descendants that are in Minnesota?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
I mean, no. So could I find them? Absolutely. I tried last week, and no, I talked to multiple branches of a family, and they're like, no one's interested.
Yeah. And see, my approach is usually on Ancestry. I can see who's doing the research and reach out to them. But you was through it wasn't Find a Grave. It was just on the Facebook Cherry Grove.
Because I inherited all of my grandma. I have a museum in my house.
That's awesome.
And so I know of people writing about Lizzie Mitchner in honor of her. Lizzie Mitchner is the Canadian who married Charles Raymond, son of John.
You mentioned out in out east that they do a big family reunion or something.
Yeah, so in like 1918, I don't know when it was, in the early 1900s, the Michener and Worthington family, so Worthington is another old family, I will presume Quaker, but I don't know. They decided to do a family reunion, and my Micheners in Minnesota have known about that family reunion, but it wasn't until I took my grandparents, which I'm not positive, but I wonder if that was after I interacted with Carol. I'd have to like look up some of my old emails to see, but that maybe is why I was like, we're doing it,
Yeah.
you know? And it was a wonderful event, but what it comes down to is it's a family reunion. You know, these are a lot of locals. You know, the Micheners out east, they might go, yeah, I'm a Michener, yeah, I'm still a Quaker, but they were farmers from Pennsylvania, there were physicians from Pennsylvania. The quality of education that I've heard is better. They pay their teachers better over there. They just value it, and that is very much part of the Quaker. The Quakers believed in common schools and providing education for everybody. There's cemeteries that allowed black people to get buried out there. You know, that would not happen here. So the reunion was great. I don't know if the lady who was like the main gal is still the main gal. She maybe has aged out, but I could easily hook you up with somebody. I would think the Mount Pleasant, Ohio trip, which I will go with you if you
Let's
go.
do that. Let's plan that. Let's do it. I wish there was funds that you could get, like grants or scholarships to do these types of research where it has a historical purpose. So even though it's also family information, it would be like documented in a way that could be shared with the public too. Like, come on, pay us to go do this.
Yeah, and I don't understand the business aspect of all of that because I fully think that that's a valuable.
Yes.
But you'd almost just have to get someone who's willing to donate, you know, a couple $100,000
Sponsor it.
to like, get it rolling.
Yes.
And actually, well, he wouldn't do it though. So there's a guy named Nino in Lewiston, which you
That's
maybe
Carol
heard of.
talks about him all the time.
He was there the day we went to that church.
Yeah. Because
He has
supposedly
a lot
his
of money.
family line is connected to something under.
Yeah.
But what we found was it was before they came to Lewiston.
Yeah,
'Cause
well,
they
he
didn't
comes
date.
from over by, well, one of his lines
somewhere in
comes over by
Wisconsin.
Harmony.
Oh, wow.
But that's I think it was a Dutch surname. I think it's the Ninos, but don't quote me on it.
Okay.
No, it's his wife, his mother.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
he is an interesting dude, but I think he also maybe suffers from a little mental health issues, or maybe he's a little uppity and I'm maybe not always at his level. But ever since I used to go to church with him as a kid.
Oh, really?
But we weren't locals.
Yeah.
And we were not rich.
Yeah.
Do you know, I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But ever since I interacted with him on that one day we spent together, I mean, he's nice enough, but I did that day with him. I was so excited, and then something happened, and I had to take care of things, and I haven't really.
Right. Been able to. I totally get it.
And that's why I like pushed you off.
Yeah.
I was expecting you to be older, and I don't know if I was looking at pictures, but you do not have any family here, right? Because I was like, Oddison, that's Norwegian, but they're not from around. You know, I don't know Oddison's around here. There's some down in Decorah, and I'm just like. I was trying to like get you into the area, and I couldn't place you.
My dad's family, the dad that raised me, right? His mom was from Albert Lea,
Okay.
and their family came to Albert Lea in the late 1800s. But they were Morgans, which you can go way
Yep.
back because he's like they were here before the Revolutionary War or something like that. And so I want to find one abolitionist in my family. Come on, please.
I bet
at
you
least
you
one.
will.
So I just gotta. I'm not an expert. Definitely, I'm learning, all the time. But yeah, they were Morgans, and I can't remember the other line.
Well, the Hickman. I mean, you have one, probably.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I want to know if I'm related to the actual Reverend Hickman, because a lot of times there was, and we think he was mulatto. I mean, he is mulatto.
Oh.
It shows up on records that he was mulatto, and you can see pictures of him. He's light skinned. So, but a lot of times you're the child of your enslaver.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, am I related to him? But that doesn't mean we were abolitionists.
Yeah.
We were enslavers. That line. But there was a lot of other Hickmans that went different directions. They didn't all become
no,
Mormon.
I'm seeing. Yep, I see what you're saying.
And then my mom's family, they all ended up like they were Confederates in the Civil War, and oh my God. But I did find somebody in there who was part. It looked like part Indigenous. So I would really love to hire somebody that knows what the hell they're looking at, because I don't know if I've got it right.
But have you built the tree and looked at the census
and I even
records?
went to, Carol invited me to this Daughters of the American Revolution thing in Winona.
I've never.
But like they were just kind of like, ooh, you need to really hone this down. And I was like, well, I don't know.
It's there. Just you have to hyper focus and give yourself a weekend.
And then like, how do you? Because that's even with this Underground Railroad stuff. You can only go so far with census records and stuff, and then you actually start reaching out to historical societies.
But a lot
and
of their
archives.
stuff's online now.
Yeah, it's like this trip to Fisk University that we were talking about in Tennessee, because some of it's online, some of it's not, and then how do you actually get somebody to talk to you on the dang phone nowadays?
Well, and that's why I've never done anything, because I've reached out to the Historical Society, and they're like, yeah, we have a folder on your husband's family. Oh, yeah, we have that. And I've called here, and they're like, yeah, we have. I've never had enough guts to actually go, because I'm like, what do I say?
Right.
How do I get there?
Yeah. And I finally
so
did that.
stupid.
I finally did that at the Minnesota Historical Society. I was so nervous because it's so like, and you can't even take anything in because they don't want you stealing stuff. I was like, what am I doing? But now I've been there like 5 times.
They're here that way too. I forgot.
Yeah.
I think
They've got a little...
when you do research, you cannot have your phone with you, which makes sense.
Well,
but I never.
they let you photograph stuff.
Oh, they do
Yeah.
here. Oh,
And
so
at
maybe that was when I was reading.
They do
else.
up there too.
Oh.
And after Carol and I drove up there 2 different times and spent like a ton of hours in there, we find out because of COVID, they created a process where anything you want, they will digitize it and send it to you, and it's like super cheap because it helps them get their collections digitized. So I can't remember, it was like a nickel a page or something. It wasn't ridiculous, but you have to know exactly like what the call number and everything, and then this is what we want. And that you can actually set up an online virtual meeting. They will show you the things. So then you can say, okay, scan me those first 5 pages. I was like, that's so cool, because not everybody wants to come in.
do that. Yeah,
to
because
the germ factory.
I did take allergy pills because I always break out when I come here.
It's bad in the archives. Yeah,
Well,
my
just
contacts.
This whole building I struggle with,
When
and
we're
I
up-
hate that.
Carol and I were up at the Historical Society. My contacts dried because of all the dust, and one I rubbed my eye, got stuck up behind my eyeball, and I thought I was gonna have to like have my husband come get me from Wabasha. Finally, she goes, just splash a bunch of water in there, and finally it came down. But every time I go into the archives, my
Yeah,
contacts,
isn't that like
it's
a
gross.
mean thing? So Katie's are in Minnesota or in Winona County, and Katie's are here, and they're from New York, so that means they're old East Coast people.
Right.
That's a name to zone
We've gone
into.
through, like, believe me, Carol and I have gone through everyone, and she kind of showed me like the things to look for, like that too. Mm-hmm. And there's only so much you'll find online, and then you have to really start digging deeper into
I've never.
places they live, churches they were involved with. It's like, it's so tedious. And if Carol wasn't so stingy, because she's very stingy, she's like, copyright, I will sue you. Copyright, I will sue you. If we could connect with Winona State University History Department, we could bring on students and assign each student like 3 names. You do the research. I'm like, we could have like a blitz where we get together and we research abolitionists. She's like, I don't want the college involved. They'll steal my information. And I'm
Well,
like,
that's
you're gonna die, and like this is gonna go nowhere because you're being
so. Then
stingy.
set up a society where they do it.
So we
and then
talked about, yes, and everything's archived and properly credited to the researchers. That's what we talked about, starting a society.
And then the college then you would allow them to present at the college, but they can't publish
Right.
the research.
Because she's had her research stolen multiple times.
Yep.
Not this, but like throughout her, because she's an ecologist.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of her science stuff was stolen.
Yep, and the Bacon family of Cherry Grove. I mean, there's just. I would love to take this home, but I know I will pay for it. But this is
It's
online. Yep.
It's such a pain in the butt online.
I just search because I'm hyper focused on.
Right.
Like, I think my grandma had this book. I know I grew up with access to this book. Wonder if I inherited it. I bet you this book is in my house.
Probably. And I acquired a Wabasha County one, so I went through and I flagged every page with a suspicious looking family, and then slowly started at night. Okay, tonight I'm doing this family.
Well, see, and like my grandma, Grandpa Finke, my Grandpa Finke, comes from these Mitchners. His wife comes from the Mayflower. So, so the Mayflower people of Massachusetts and the Quakers of Pennsylvania did not marry until 1950 in Minnesota.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. They're paths came together.
But they all came from England.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy.
Interesting.
So I'm just going to do this. Are you bored crazy?
No, I'm just overwhelmed in that how do you know all this stuff?
I know, and like she can retain it. I have to look at notes. I can't remember that.
That's why we kind of joke about it. And my grandma Bernie was like that, and my dad is like that, and we call it the Hoopman Geek Factor. And we have geeks in our family, and I never thought I was one, but I am.
Oh, you are. So what are your thoughts?
That's your favorite takeaway, isn't it, Gloria?
We got that on record.
I would say I'm one
That's
too,
not
though,
the headline.
What are your thoughts then on the role that your ancestors might have played in ending slavery if they were truly abolitionists and Underground Railroad involved?
I believe that my family...
Like, are you like, woohoo, that's awesome?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that my family, and this is probably just a generic summary of not all Quakers, but of the movement. You are raised with a set of principles, whether you chose to redesign them or not. You know, generation after generation is following a family's set of principles. Mm-hmm. Sources doesn't matter, but there are principles. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe, without question, that has impacted 13 generations of Mitchners. Mm-hmm. Their efforts supported the movement, whether they actually did it or not. They're in the same places as the movement. The effort involved is extremely important, and the key players, you know, the black people putting in the effort, the white people putting in the effort, the Indians putting in the effort, that's all important and, you know, key. But you can't have that effort without the support of the ideation. Mm-hmm. And so whether they were doing the work or not, they were supporting the movement. Mm-hmm. We need all of that.
Right.
And they're part of that. And I truly feel it. You know, I just don't believe that I come from racists. And people would say, well, isn't that a white thing for you to say? But I truly believe that. Now, I was raised in the 1980s, post Martin Luther King, post civil rights movements. So you would say you were a product of the education you were given. Right. You know, yes, partly. But you can have that education and go home to a house that has not the same principles mm-hmm. that were taught at school. Mm-hmm. Nothing I was taught at school ever conflicted with what I experienced at home. Saying the word Negro, you just didn't do it. It wasn't part of your lexicon. You know, Brazilian nuts were not nigger toes. Mm-hmm. But for some families there were, which is fine. But to me, that is fine, meaning typical. Mm. I truly believe that it just wasn't lexicon allowed in the family, and that it's just another hint. Mm-hmm. You know, like, this is our family prayer. So everyone has a family prayer if you choose to pray. Ours before dinner was, I fold my hands, I bow my head, I thank thee for thy daily bread. Amen. How plain mm-hmm. can you get? Mm-hmm. No beautiful, you know, it's like the most plain thing you can do. Yeah. So is that a Quaker prayer? I've been trying to find it. I can't prove it. Was it just a simple prayer they taught kids in Sunday school? Probably. I don't know. But the thee and the thy, you know, which is also in the Bible, but it's just like, I just wonder.
Mm-hmm. It's inclusive in the way it's like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just think, yes, I'm proud of my family. They're good people. I would classify them as good, wholesome people now. They aren't all. So like my Aunt Beth, my great Aunt Beth, I called her yesterday. She grew up in the area. She is the sister to my grandpa. They never knew that at Etna, they had a generation of people buried there. They just, they drove by that road for decades. And it wasn't until he was almost 90 that I brought him to that cemetery. And he's like, you know, I've lived here my whole life and I've never been in this cemetery before.
Wow.
And it's like, Grandpa,
yeah,
this is the first one.
Right.
He had no clue. So when I called her yesterday, she says there was no...
They didn't talk about it.
They didn't talk about it. But, you know, the Evangelical United Brethren was a church that supported temperance. The temperance movement was definitely in Fillmore County. My family was definitely involved with it. The Quaker settler, his son, was a temperance circuit speaker. That's in the history books. They funded anti-abolitionists to agreed to attend a society meeting, and that's published in an Ohio newspaper about abolition. So even if we don't say he's doing it, we have proof that he paid or said, I'm going to that meeting. So that's proof.
Carol knows where to look to find signatures too. And that's the thing too, is like, did they sign a petition? Not that they have to, but if you can find that, that's just another clue. And she knows how to find those.
Well, I know where they're published. I found it's on the federal government, I'm not going to say the right word, but, some website, and the Blakesleys, the Blackledges, the Blakesleys of Minnesota.
Are they all on there?
Yeah, they say, and I have it on a page right here, but it's a newspaper publication, and so I'm like, oh, maybe they wrote articles. No, they didn't write an article, but here it says, these people from this state, this state, this state, they're agreeing to attend this conference, or they funded something.
Oh, cool.
And so that's published, Blakesley from Fillmore County, Minnesota.
Wow, that's cool.
So I found some of that stuff, but I don't have it organized because I'm not trained.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I'm in that same boat.
But the Mount Pleasant people, I've emailed them, but I've basically said, do you have stuff? Yep, we know about the Missioners. And I said, well, I'm not asking you to do anything, but I want to come and see you someday. And they're like, we'll be ready.
Yeah, let's plan a trip. Let's do it. Carol actually wants to go out to Ohio too, so maybe we could.
I don't mind her. I can handle crazy people.
And I get along great with her, but that's because I know where she talks tough, like I'll sue you, but I know that's talk. I probably shouldn't say that on an interview, but so I've learned what to take serious.
Well, yeah, and basically she's just kind of people will say there's violence in dialogue, but she's just making it very clear.
Oh, she's aggressive. Yeah.
Just you don't get to do that to me, and
right.
If you do, I'm going to sue you.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
I would never do that. Like, I was nervous. So another person, and we haven't even talked about this yet. Jetty Corbett. Have you heard of his name? Okay.
That's just because somebody at Historic Forestville gave me that name.
Yes.
I started looking at his wife's side. That's where I was interested, because what brings him here. And that was interesting, the wife's side, because she was white.
I know, but so tell me what you know, and then I'll tell you.
I don't even remember, but I thought
Ballard,
it looked
Luella
like there was some possibility that they could have been.
Because they go back to Harmony area, I think.
Okay.
I don't remember about her, but so Jetty Corbett he was born after the Civil War in Camden, New Jersey. And in the last week I found out Camden, New Jersey is a hotbed for the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
He is living in Iowa, which really none of that matters, because the idea is, when do they say the Underground stopped? It didn't stop with just the war,
it stops
did it?
as the war ends.
So it truly,
when the war ends,
like, they think it did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because then they're technically free. But,
But the routes or the friendly people would still be possibly a purposeful
right. And what
tool to
happens,
have.
and this is part of Carol's last chapter of her book, is the Freedmans and the Reconstruction era. Because then we start to see all these, and Winona sent, what was the deal? Winona sent more supplies to aid the Freemen than all the other states combined. So that's a clue that, like, some serious abolitionist work going on there.
Well, serious money,
but then
too.
we send more teachers down there. Like, Minnesota's sending all kinds of stuff to help rebuild after the Civil War. So that's kind of the story of what happens as the Underground Railroad ends. Now it's how do we help these people learn and get jobs and have their own homes.
I cannot wait till that book comes out.
Oof, yeah.
Jetty Corbett got married. I don't remember if she was black or not, but she was black. I just saw the thing
He had
last
two
night.
wives, though, right? One died, and then he remarried the white lady from here.
Yeah, she died in
and she was
Holt,
black,
Minnesota.
I think.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting dude, and what's another hint about the energy of the Cherry Grove community. Okay, we know they're evangelical, EUB, Brethrens, that's the pacifist, in theory, pacifist, but evangelicals, they're talking, they're singing, separate. They're separate from the other churches. But at the same time, in the 1890s, when they're kind of really formalizing their church, you have the established Dutch congregation over in Greenleafton. They are their own kind of world, and if you leave their world, that might not be good. And, like the Germans are, I don't know where a lot of the Germans are. There's there's Irish German. Chatfield has a lot of Irish Catholics. But what I'm trying to say is, so you have these communities of the religion. Mm-hmm. So in 1944, 100 years after, the Underground Railroad, this black man is in Fillmore County. He's employed by my people to work in the lumber industry. He just needs a job. My aunt says she can tell me where he lived.
So that's good to know he was working for your family.
He was working for my family. That. So my family was willing to employ him. And Beth is like, well, he needed a job. He was willing to work, so we hired him. It wasn't like you had to have a discussion about it. It was just, that's what, they were not racist.
Right.
But so this guy falls in love with a white girl in 1944. He's in his second marriage. Chances are no kids are going to be born by their ages. And whether anyone even thinks about that, but it's a second marriage. The pastor at Cherry Grove, Reverend Zoll, agreed to marry them by a pastor at Cherry Grove, but not in the church, but in the parsonage.
Okay.
But my grandma's like, our pastor did marry them. So awesome. Being married by a church was important enough to them.
Yes. And
he did it.
So that's interesting too, because of the time frame. Shoot, I don't have the article here, but I'd given it to, I had to come in here to get something. I had Sarah pull it up on microfiche or whatever you call that, because I interviewed this author the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. She did the series of interviews in the 90s, interviewing black people who were in the CCC, which they were sent to segregated camps for the most part. And then partway through, they started sending them to the Deep South. And these kids grew up in Minnesota, and their parents are like, we don't want them going, they're going to get lynched down there. So it's a big deal, like the NAACP got involved and everything. But there was an article she mentioned in her book that in Preston, like, the people rioted. They're like, we don't want these blacks here. We don't want them marrying our girls. We don't want them marrying our white girls.
And this is the 30s?
This is the 30s. Oh, but this would have been after, though. This was the 40s when he got married.
I know, but so I was raised, and there's no family history of issues. Like, did you ever see the movie Sweetland?
Yeah. Is that the one that, did they film that up by St. Olaf or something?
Well, no. West of the
It's about
cities.
the Norwegian immigrant coming over. Yeah.
And so how that was a very much part of the storyline was the energy of, there was a half-breed, and she married a Norwegian. She's a German who's going to get married by mail-order bride, like that whole thing. But because she's German and entering this Norwegian, it's not going to work.
Right.
I'm like, we didn't have that here. I've never heard those stories. And I said that out loud. And my best friend is from Lewiston. She's a Daly. And so the Dalys are Irish and German. And she married a Russian Jew from East Coast. This is modern day. He's like, Mike was just telling me how bad it was. And I'm like, what? I've never heard that.
Yeah.
But, and this is another generation of mission work, living by principles, post-war, Cherry Grove Church was part of this huge relief program to return animal stock to Europe while Europe is in reconstruction. I can't remember how they phrased it. And my grandpa, who was a Michener, his mother was a Michener, he went with Reverend Zoll, who married the black person, and they go to Poland to deliver cattle to restock Europe.
Holy smokes. Huh. Interesting. Carol was at a Civil War roundtable a few years back, and there were some folks from the Rushford area, and it came up. They were older. No, actually, she said this guy was probably my age, but it was stories his grandpa had told him, I think. But it was about some blacks that had been living in the area, and there was some interracial kind of marriage, dating stuff going on, and it was like a big taboo thing. And then after that, she discovers this whole Jeffrey family, right, that's living right around there. And then this Donna Buckby lady.
I know her.
Okay.
Or I used to know
I
her.
talked with her because she said when she moved into the Rushford area, and she wasn't originally from here, but in the 70s she moved here. And somebody she had gotten to know at the time had mentioned how, which is talk about the history of the area, that there was a black man that was lynched somewhere around Rushford under a bridge. People could hear him screaming. And it could be because he was, like, there was an interracial relationship going on there. And then something about, and she couldn't remember if it was the Lenora Church or some other church. There was some little community outside of Rushford where there was a fairly dominant black, like, population of people attending the church, and that church got burned down. I couldn't find any record on that, but I think about the Jeffrey family attending their own
So
stuff.
I know one of the mixed blood mulatto descendants, but I don't know their story, but I know one of them from Rushford. I'll reach out to them.
Yeah,
to see.
check into that, because here's the other thing then. I interview a different guy. Doesn't know this lady, didn't tell him that story. He says, turn that thing off. Turn it off. He goes, so one of the stories that was handed down to me was there was a interracial kind of thing going on, and they took the guy under the bridge. They didn't kill him, but they stuck his head between a wagon wheel and they castrated him, and people could hear him screaming into town. I'm like, that kind of confirms kind of what this other lady had heard in a different way. So I'm like,
Do you know the surname of the black family, or one? Is it Rindles or Randalls or? So I was reading about that before I met Carol, and I said it to her, and I'm like, I've read about a black family down there recently, and
I don't know, but I know
it was spelled different. But the thing is the name. You know how spellings of names change, or you
Yes.
document it and it's
Yes.
wrong.
Yes.
And I'm just like, ew, I wonder if these people come from there. And I was trying to build their family tree, but of course I got sidetracked. So I know the family who has black ancestry from down there.
Well, so there's probably multiple. The only ones that I have been working on with her are the Jeffreys, but it's extensive, right? So
But the Jeffreys weren't black.
they were the mulatto.
Oh, they
and
are,
American.
and they had like 10. Okay,
So
yeah.
this is all the last names that come into that family: Wade, Clean, Jeffrey, Davis. There's a bunch more. They start mixing it with more European sounding
Mm-hmm.
names because they're intermarrying with white people and
The
stuff
locals.
too. But what's interesting is like a bunch of them went up through Canada first, married there, and then came down. So, and I was like, if you think Underground Railroad, is that intentional? But I saw that even within like the Scandinavian stuff where there'd be some that came to New York, then they were in Canada, then they came to Minnesota. So I'm like, I don't quite understand
So I
that.
read, those shows where they talk about the movie stars and the family. It's, I can't think of her name. Shoot. But they talk about that. The family was in northern New York, and they ended up going into Canada because of the Indian Wars. I can't remember what it.
Sure.
I don't know that it was King Philip's War. I can't remember how it was, but so some of it was just fleeing to get away from unrest.
That makes sense.
And then so that's what I presume, and I haven't ever matched the timeline, but Lizzie Brown, who married Charles Raymond Michener, is someone that if my research is correct, I have several generations back. So I thought, well, I just find her dynamic. I have a picture of her. I want to learn more about her. But she was married like 3 times and had 3 kids with 3 different surnames. And I thought, if you're an upstanding local Michener, you're a circuit speaker and, like Quaker, do you really marry someone who's been married 3 times? But that happened
Right.
more, but I
Oh
was
my
just
gosh, it's
thinking
amazing how
3
yeah.
husbands, like holy
These
cow.
are bad luck. People dying like hotcakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like Carol say, a lot of times with the guys, you'll see where they had like 3 or 4 wives because they were dying in childbirth, like constantly, repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, can you imagine? So that family over there, so this guy that was telling me that story about the guy being castrated, I got connected him through another person who's been kind of researching the Underground Railroad just casually. And Carol told me to talk. She goes, talk to Laura Deering in Rushford, who's she works for Mayo. She's been writing about
been reading
about the Stevenses in Rushford. So we've like stayed away from that intentionally, let her have that. So we haven't really actually done a whole lot on Rushford because that's her turf. And then this Jeff Broberg, who is a geologist, but he does some history kind of stuff. And when the National Trout Center was in Preston, he was leading like bus tours. And so he was finding different themes to do tours. And so he's like, oh, Underground Railroad would be interesting, because he ran into somebody at a bar who had grown up in Hart area that had heard stories growing up about the Underground Railroad there. So I connected with that guy. He connected me to this guy who's a Zabel.
That's the name that
Yeah.
I would connect you with.
Yeah, so Zabel, he had Steinbauer. They're connected to the Steinbauer family. Steinbauers are Czechoslovakian, which in Carol's like, here's who to look at and here's not who to not waste your time on. She would have said, don't ever look at, that's a German sounding name. They're Catholic. Don't even waste your time, because Catholics.
Because I would have the exact same thought process.
But this guy, this old Joe Steinbauer, worked on his family's farm when this Zabel guy was a kiddo. So this is in the 50s. This guy was 70 at the time or whatever. So he had stories that he was telling this kid about.
And he was repeating.
My ancestors were helping with the Underground Railroad, and he had all these details about freedom seekers coming up through and where they hid them, and all this information that he had supposedly heard from this guy. So Steinbauer, Czechoslovakian,
That's
like
hilarious.
it's not kind of what you would think, right?
My impression of Steinbauer is not positive, and it doesn't matter, but that's hilarious because it's just funny.
Yeah, so just kind of strange. But here's the thing: I was reading up on the Czechs. So in their homeland, they were like taken by the Russians and forced to fight their war for them. So it's kind of going back to that thing where, like, yeah, we kind of and not every Czechoslovakian is going to hold the same views.
Well, no, but that's the same with the I'm not going to think of the right word. The enclave of the particular Polish. The Bronx are part of it. There's a area in North Poland. Shoot, I can't think of the word. Casmian Polish. Can't think of the right word. It starts with a K or a C. But they're Slavic Poles.
Okay.
So they came from Eastern Europe and ended up in this area of Poland. So when Winona got infiltrated with all the Poles, there was two cliques of Poles, because some really weren't the Germanic Poles, they were Slavic Poles.
Interesting.
And so that has its own energy and issues in Winona. Winona's got good stuff to research.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting.
Kashubian, that's the word. Kashubian. And, yeah, it's very interesting.
So I interviewed then this Marianne Carrier, and she's a Steinbauer, but yeah, she had never heard any of that. So I connected her to this Zabel, and then she went and talked with him. And, so she took me through her whole family tree and like how they got here and what they were involved with here. But, and they were very politically active too. So there's like common
And they
threads.
still are.
Yeah. And then she's like, telling me about the cave, because there's this cave that comes up, this Steinbauer cave. And so she connected me to this other guy who were trying to figure out a time to go look at this cave, because there were these rumors of this crazy Steinbauer that actually lived in this cave, and like 2 different people confirmed this now, and this cave is there, and it's actually got like stone archway around it and a door on it. And if to be involved in the Underground Railroad, there's a certain time frame, right? And a lot of these Steinbauers were coming after the Civil War, but there's a couple of them that were here early 1860s, and this crazy Steinbauer, he's here and then he disappears, and they thought he ended up in the Dakotas or something. I'm like, this guy we need to find out more about if he's living in a freaking cave.
So why do they call it this? Okay, so the Zabels, they were the hired men of the Steinbauer, or the Steinbauer was there?
So they ended up buying the Steinbauer farm.
Okay.
And then this Joe Steinbauer was still around, this older bachelor, and he was a hired hand on the farm.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, and so he like knew the farm like the back of his hand, and he had all these stories about their family had lived there for several generations by that time. Yeah, so... But oftentimes it's like when I'm approaching folks, I know more than they do, but I need to connect what they know to what I know and see, what kind of seems to make sense.
I don't know very much, apparently. I can just show you the spread of the Mitchners. So, Worthington, Minnesota. So, it's the Mitchner Worthington.
Really?
There's Mitchners in Worthington, Minnesota.
Interesting.
But, Worthington's probably a place to look also.
Yeah, when you mentioned that name, I was like, because Carol's talking about not Okoboji, where Spirit Lake is Okoboji.
Yeah.
That's like right near there. That's just south of there, isn't it? So, yeah, interesting.
And so the thing about, I don't know that I'm filtering anything right now I'm just trying to think. But the train of thought was, how does Jetty Corbett end up in Fillmore County when he's from Hope? I do not know that connection. My aunt did not know that connection.
Yeah.
My grandpa John's like, figure out whatever. I love Jetty. Like, you come tell me what you learned. He's still alive, 94.
Wow.
But if Jetty comes from Camden, New Jersey, and that was a hotbed, and his dad, I think, was born in 1845, which is when my whatever ancestor, Charles Raymond, was
like,
born.
did they know each other? Or?
Yep, that's what I'm wondering. And I have another question, because when my grandpa was a young man and not married yet, he went and worked in, like, Des Moines at some, like, meat plant or something. And he's working with all these black people, and I don't know how it kind of happened, but they said, John, and he'd go to their houses and whatever. And this is the late 40s. They're like, John, you are safe as long as you're with us. But if you don't come to these houses alone. And so he had this, like, very small moment of his life where, again, he's not racist. He's willing to live with them. He's going to eat their food, whatever. How did that happen?
Right,
like,
yeah.
I don't know. But the Mitchners had family that were raised here that ended up down in Iowa.
Huh.
So I wonder if it was a cousin, like
Right,
something like
right.
that. So that's another thing. Because if Jetty Corbett is black and from Iowa, my grandpa ends up in Iowa to work with black people, Jetty would have been, I do not know how they all play together.
Right.
But one of the Mitchners ends up getting, in not a direct ancestor, but someone I read about in the last week or two. For whatever reason, he goes to Camden, New Jersey to get married. His marriage record's there. So that place is... And then I reached out to some black historian who is he's from, like, North Carolina, and he's interested in Camden, New Jersey, and, there's a website or speaking engagement or something, and they haven't returned my call. I wanted to make contact with him before I met you, because I haven't even had time to read the website I found. Like, I just haven't had time.
Right.
But Camden, New Jersey, Quakers, Mitchners, everyone's Ohio, down in Indiana. Why didn't they stop in Illinois? Why didn't, whatever. They end up in Minnesota. They stopped and spent the winter with, it's documented where in Iowa. So then you look at that, wherever that is. And then Fillmore County.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know enough.
Right.
And they didn't talk about it. Like I said to my Aunt Beth, I said, well, we're Mabel and Emil, which is Mabel's the Mitchner. She says they were good churchgoers, but they weren't pious. There's other families who thought, we're really good Christians.
Sure.
They were firm in their beliefs. They were more liberal than the church. So they're more liberal than a liberal church. But they never pushed it on anybody. But Mabel cared for local handicapped people. My grandpa said when the tramps would come through town, she'd give them food. They knew to come to her. This is the granddaughter of the suspected Underground Railroad. They'd come, she'd feed them. They'd go south of town under a bridge to eat it or whatever. Like, my grandpa remembers that. No liquor in the house, and if there was, it was hidden, which tells me maybe there was. If she knew enough to say, if there was, it was hidden. And then you could not play cards in their house, but you could play Rook, which, do you know that game? I've never played it.
I think we had it growing up.